know what the federal court said, but I can tell you what the corporate industry is going to say. Well, we want to do these less expensively. We want to whittle out the frivolous cases, and we just want to not take up the court's time. Most arbitrators are paying $10,000 a day to get the cases. So it's not less expensive. It's not cheaper. It's not less time consuming. It's a farce.
And what about the abuse, the neglect? They're taking your person in, you know, somebody that you work with as a nurse or whatever, and you know there's a cognitive impairment, but yet they're having them sign contracts. They're having them make payments out of accounts when they're cognitively impaired.
So the question I have on that is, if someone has not been deemed incompetent,
Right.
can they technically still sign those contracts? I mean, even though they know that's not right, but they haven't been deemed incompetent or haven't been assigned a guardian to sign those. So can they
Scott.
legitimately
Great timing for that.
you know?
Yeah, an incompetent person cannot legally sign a contract. The problem is that if they have not been adjudicated incompetent, their legal rights to contract haven't been legally removed. So somebody would have to argue later that they were not competent enough to sign that agreement and that they were taken advantage of, essentially. And that's a fight that would have to be taken, I suppose, at your level.
It's the case example I just gave, that she was admitted to the facility because of her dementia and because of her hallucinations and everything else, and now they want to try to tell me that she was competent to sign the document. I'm looking forward to that fight.
So with that person knowing, now your person, they could have deemed incompetent, right? They could have had them, would you say, adjudicated incompetent before they went in. But for anybody else that you know they're not totally incompetent, they have good days and bad
The
days.
case law has not been helpful at all on arbitration clauses, and they're starting to stick more and more and more because every time it gets bounced to arbitration, it's one less case the court has to deal with.
Go ahead.
So if the power of attorney explicitly removes the right of the agent to sign an arbitration clause in a facility agreement, and the power of attorney signs the agreement, is that something that would allow you to later argue that that's not a binding contract?
Absolutely. The power of attorney can only do those rights granted to him by the grantor, and that was a right that was specifically excluded. You're a genius, by the way, because I never heard of that before, and that's great. From now on, I think every time I have a client that's going to sign a POA, I'm going to instruct them to make sure to get that provision. We'll probably end up with some good case law in 4 or 5 years.
Gina?
What stuff, your back is against the wall as guardian. There are no options. Especially when you're looking at, I took an emergency temporary guardian this year, and I try to stay away from guardianship lately, but I took one, a man had been in the hospital for 6 months. He was fine, he just had like maybe some type of early dementia or maybe some brain injury due to alcohol, possibly. And so we had to try to move him out of the hospital. Nobody would sign the Medicaid application. The guy was in the hospital for over 6 months. So obviously that's not a good environment, but try to find a nursing, this man.
It has to be a much lesser rate. It can't be secretarial work, faxes, emails, copies, stuff like that.
One question, Andrea.
Sure.
Some guardians that I know, some of my colleagues, have people that work for them, but they don't disclose that that person did the work. They're billing it like they did the work. I have talked
Not
to
any of
several
my
guardians.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I've talked to several guardians, and they've told me, like, because when I said, I had an intern, and that, when I get her certified, I'm gonna, disclose the fact that she's working for me. And then I'm going to bill her out, and you can bill it at $40 an hour because she's got that experience. Once they have the 2 years under their belt, they're certified, you have the credential.
Yeah.
Well, and two of these colleagues said to me, what, are you kidding me? I bill it at my rate at $85 an hour. I don't even tell them that I have somebody doing the work.
I wouldn't do it myself. Do I think that there could be any justification for that?
What
Your attorneys
happens
come up
if
with crazy things. I wouldn't.
What
Jill
happens
agrees
if
with
they
me.
get caught?
I mean, nobody that I represent does that.
Because what you're
They
doing-
break them out.
That would be like taking paralegals' work and billing it at attorney's rates. That's the way I
I
look
see
at it.
that too.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that too.
I'm very cautious. You know, I worked hard to get where I am. I worked hard through law school. I'm not taking any chances. You know, your name is everything in this profession.
It is true.
And especially with all the bad press with
That's
professional
right,
guardians.
all the bad press.
Okay, so we talked about the amount of time, you know, the time frames for seeking your petitions and seeking payment for your petitions, mileage and travel time. Now, South County is a little more, I'm being recorded, so I should watch my word. South County is a little more stringent with reviewing what you present before the judges. Sometimes in main branch, it's not as stringent, you know. They really make you cross your T's, dot your I's. They will not allow you to travel or to charge for mileage or travel time for your clients, for yourself. So if poor Bonnie tracks up from Broward County for a Palm Beach County hearing and puts, you know, an hour in the car travel time, the judges and the staff typically won't allow that. If you've had some slip through, you're a lucky woman. But they look for this now. And same with the attorneys. Sometimes I'll go to an ex parte hearing,
So
or I'll
what
go
do
to a
you do?
motion
You can't
calendar.
recoup your expenses.
You're not supposed to charge for travel or mileage.
It's the same thing in Broward, you're not supposed to charge them travel.
Yeah.
I never, ever allow anyone to charge.
I don't either. And, you know, for myself, I used to practice somewhat in Miami. I drive an hour and a half. I live in Wellington.
Yeah.
In the car, I'd say, schedule me conference calls with other clients, because that's the only way I'm gonna make my time up to get down there.
They're killing us.
Yeah.
Maria Corbett will chop your hands off. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's a no-no.
If I give you a referral and you come into one of my communities and you look around and you go, I might have somebody else that would really like this. I think it just builds the whole, it's part of building the relationship.
So if I could, I'll take that and change it just a little bit further, if I can, all right? And there may be people who disagree, all right? I think if you don't start with delivering the service you pretend to deliver, don't bother, all right? This is about delivering the service. I'm in the most competitive, my situation is the most competitive in the room, I believe. If I don't deliver what I promise, why would anybody do business with me? If I'm just like everybody else, I'm like everybody else, all right? And then there is no value added. So I think you have to figure out, if you really want to make a dent in the community, you have to figure out what it is that makes you unique, what do you bring to that marketplace, all right? How do you stand apart, all right? And can you deliver what you say? And if you do that, people will be the path to your door. But just saying that is not enough. All right, and you're right, you talk to people, and if you have a referral, if I have a referral for a professional guardian, I know who I call. All right, I guess that's odd, you don't really have a referral for a professional guardian typically, although I have had situations that have ended up in that circumstance. You know, I have my go-to people, and we do go back and forth, but it's never like, I haven't had a referral from you in a month or two. So I think you're absolutely right, you gotta give referrals out, but you gotta get something back, so.
When last did you do any kind of training around working with all the Jewish adults and Holocaust survivors? I don't think we serve Holocaust survivors. I don't know what they are. You talk about running 100 miles. I don't run so fast, but I can certainly move to the side of those kinds of. So when it comes down to just the referrals, it really is, and I think you said it, Kelly, to me it's all about relationship. And it's about ethical practice and making the quick buck or doing the quick thing doesn't lend itself to ongoing sustainability.
Your person that do the screening or the client themselves, they can release that rank to you.
Okay. Is that going to be written or is it just verbal, you think?
Hopefully verbal.
Okay.
I just want to know what it is. So here's the interesting thing about the wait list. What that is someone calls in and they say, I need in-home assistance for my loved one. Sometimes they need Medicaid, they want Medicaid specifically, or they're going assisted living, they want Medicaid specifically. They're going to get a telephone screening. That telephone screening lasts about 45 minutes. It's very specific to their activities of daily living. How much help you need with bathing, dressing, toileting, transferring, and the flip side of that coin is how much help you currently have with those same activities. At the end of that screening, it's going to generate a priority and ranking score. The 5, those with the greatest need are going to be coming off of that wait list. So those folks I don't worry about so much. The next month they're probably going to call saying you get the happy call, you get the good news call.
Yeah.
it's the ones and twos that aren't gonna go anywhere. They're really gonna be sitting there for a while. Did that answer your
Yeah,
question?
it does. I mean, I try to be really honest with clients about, I had this conversation this past week. I said, you're not going to be a priority.
Right.
Because you have, number one, you have a spouse in the home who's providing some support, and you also have outside care coming in that you're
Sure.
currently paying for.
Sure.
When your money runs out, then it may be a different situation, but you're not going to be a priority right now. So,
Because the needs are being met.
yeah, they are, exactly. Thank you.
Question?
Couple quick questions. Did you say you're funded through the state?
Our funding comes from several sources. The Older American Act is federal dollars.
It seems
Right.
that
That
it's-
kid needed to
oh,
be
well,
locked up.
everyone should, this was in plain sight, that this, this kid was or this man was a ticking time bomb. So obviously, we, all of these agencies should have prevented him from getting access to a gun. And this is the last political thing I'll say. But preventing him from getting access to a gun, no, that's the one thing that shouldn't have happened. So.
He needs to be locked up. People like him need to be locked up. They need to be put into a place where they can be protected. The rest of us can be protected from him, those people with mental health issues.
Not everyone.
I'm not saying anyone with a mental health issue. I'm saying those people that are that psychotic, that aggressive, with that history. Sandy Hook, same situation. He needed to be put into a place, and his mother gave him access to guns.
How do you determine beforehand, this is the person that is going to shoot up a 6-year-old?
You know what, there are people that know that. There are people don't just snap in a second. There's history, there's background, there's information. When you know that people have a history of doing things, the bigger problem is that there's nowhere for them. That's the bigger issue.
That's a problem, but there's also human rights, so it takes quite a bit legally to lock someone up.
I really want to respond to something you said about yourself being triggered, because that is the other thing about trauma.
Secondary PTSD.
It's not just the secondary PTSD, and I don't like to talk about PTSD as the be-all and end-all of working with trauma, because I believe that there is something that happens in older adults from earlier trauma that is much more related to LOSS, late onset symptomatology stress. So
I never heard of that.
it's in the notes that I gave. So they are brilliant notes, just say. So the late onset symptomatology stress is much more related to a functional, not necessarily someone who's self-medicated with alcohol, but someone who functions pretty much and seems to function all of their lives, and then something happens in late adulthood and they stop functioning. They no longer can cope because they've been re-triggered. So this isn't the case with you because you're not really in late adulthood, but you made me kind of want to talk about that because we do experience our own trauma. So your father actually was in the war, probably saw horrendous things, had to deal with horrendous things, shell-shocked, comes back. Oftentimes trauma doesn't have words, right? So the person who's experienced the rape, the person who's experienced the trauma, don't have words to describe it. And so they can't share it. It's sometimes not that they don't want to, they can't. They just don't have the words. And also feel so alone, no one will hear. But you experienced your own trauma. So what re-triggers you is actually your own trauma, not your father's trauma. Being the daughter.
So that.
Asset searching. Let's say you have a loved one with dementia and you need a full accounting of their assets and they're not able to give you that information, or that loved one has recently deceased and you don't know where their assets are. Have you guys been in this situation before? What have you guys done? Let's share some stories.
Change the address, and then you start getting the mail. One.
As the guardian, we send out to something like, 75 different banks that we know. The list grows all the time. Our letters of guardianship and a fax cover sheet that specifically says, this person may or may not be a victim of financial exploitation. Please let us know if he has any accounts with you. And it's funny because we didn't used to get hardly any responses until we changed it and said this person may be a victim of financial exploitation. And I think probably the bank's risk managers took a look at that and said, we better reply.
We also have something we call an inventory of assets, and when you get appointed, usually you go into the property.
Relative that says, you know what, there's another account somewhere, I know there is. Or there's an offshore account, but I don't know where it is. I mean, have you guys had that experience?
Absolutely.
Or you do the bank forwarding and the family doesn't believe you because they think that there's more money somewhere.
Yeah, I have a case now, I've had them for 8 months, I just found more money, so we found assets. Yay.
Yeah. Well, there's also the abandoned property.
Yeah.
That individual, you don't know where they lived before. A lot of times they want you to provide the address of record at the time that the money went, is sheeted to the state in essence, right? And so sometimes that's a challenge. We had a client